Welcome to GCA Unmuted, Voices of Virtual Education, the podcast where we share the stories and strategies that show how Georgia Cyber Academy makes online learning work. Today's episode is all about co-teaching. In a virtual setting, collaboration isn't just helpful, it's essential. But how do two teachers truly share a classroom when they're not even in the same room? That's what we'll explore today. I'm joined by three GCA faculty who know this work inside and out. Jess Newman, Keisha Jennings, and Parker Martin. Experienced co-teachers, now instructional coaches, curriculum coordinators, who have made virtual collaboration not only possible, but powerful. From smoother planning to stronger student outcomes, we'll break down what makes co-teaching work online and how it's shaping the future of virtual education. But let's kick things off with a story. So can one of you share a specific moment or experience where you saw the real impact of effective co-teaching at GCA?
Well, I'm going to derail this plane already onto a little sidebar, Halton, because I don't know if everyone who might be listening today even knows what co-teaching really is. And so if we could start there, I think that would be great to kind of give everyone a baseline. And so when we're looking at co-teaching in a brick and mortar setting, it really is a general education teacher and a special education teacher in the same physical space serving students. When we're here at GCA, it's the same concept, but they're in the same virtual classroom sharing that space and serving students. So you have this back and forth play between a general education teacher and a special education teacher using their specialties to serve the same mixed group of students. It can get really interesting as far as each classroom kind of has its own character based on its teachers. And we'll talk more about that too, because I know that we have lots of co-taught pairs, so we have lots of stories to share about them.
Sure. So now that we know what co-teaching is, what do you can one of y'all share like a specific moment, story, something that you remember or something you saw that was like, man, that was co-teaching, and if we could just copy that, then we would be perfect. Chef's kiss.
Yeah, I'd love to give a shout out to one of our middle grade bands co-teaching pairs, Harold and Virginia. They teach social studies and they really play off of each other so well. They bring so much life to the classroom. Virginia loves to wear like fun hats that are on theme with whatever they are teaching in social studies. They love to not just look at where the student needs are, but also where their strengths are. And so they are able to really go deeper and know their students and then know how to help them thrive in the classroom.
So why do you think that works so well? Them knowing their students so well. Why is that a good thing? Why does that help co-teaching, would you say?
Yeah. So when you're working with all students and specifically students with disabilities, you need to know how best to reach them. What supports do they need and also where they are already successful. And so when you have two people in the classroom and you can kind of split that load and then even provide, more one-on-one or small group support, you can get to know those kids better and then also make sure that you're tailoring your lessons to what can help them succeed.
And I have something to add on that because, Keisha, we both had something to add on that.
Yeah.
When you've got two people in there, when somebody doesn't get it from me, then maybe they get it from Parker when it's presented in just a tiny different way, a little different perspective. And you have the power of two people in that room to give those two different perspectives, even on the fly sometimes.
Yeah. And even to flip that just a bit, on the other side, Parker, when you were talking, it made me think about two teachers that we have, the secondary grade band, who on the other side of that have already shown how strong communication and collaboration is just going to be a benefit to their students, right? Christy Kendall Williams and Bree Nevis, who is a former teacher of the year here at GCA. Let me just shout that team out because they have done a phenomenal job both in pre-planning and now since school has started. I mean, just the ideas that they have together and understanding that it is a true partnership and it takes working together in every aspect of it, whether it's when you're in the classroom, but it is all the stuff in preparation for creating lessons and assignments and tasks that are just rigorous enough for a special population. You know, it doesn't mean working with special education students doesn't mean making it easier. It means providing them with the supports they need to succeed in the general education curriculum, and that takes both teachers. So they're doing a great job, and I just think that's another story that came to mind for me.
No, that's a perfect segue to Keisha. So talking about these two teachers, making sure that they work together. So how do these teachers divide responsibilities between co-teachers? How do they decide who takes the lead when? And I understand that y'all have also been in this capacity, so you can either talk about yourself and your own experience or what you've seen.
So you saw me raise my hand. Most of my, I've been in education for over 20 years. Most of my experience is in the brick and mortar. So even in Zoom, I have to throw up the brick and mortar hand to say, I got this one. Because one thing I learned very quickly in this environment, right? I've been here 5 years, is that we can all get in these silos and feel like we are the only ones with the amount of work we have. So one of the things that I think is very, very important from the beginning is the co-teachers having a meeting just where they communicate about what each other's responsibilities are. And that's, excuse me, very different in this virtual environment than it is in any brick and mortar school that I've taught, right? And especially for special education teachers who also serve as special education case managers and have caseloads that they have to manage progress monitoring for, IEP meetings, all kinds of things. And oftentimes general education teachers have no idea what's going on. So they might think, well, my special education teacher doesn't have a homeroom or talk about those things up front, come up with a plan that works for both of you. Also, another reason why that's important is because it helps you divide responsibilities in the classroom. It really makes a difference to a special education teacher when you can say, I have an eligibility meeting to prepare for. And your co-teacher understands that that means, oh, she's got to go dig up mountains of data to get ready for this meeting. Let's see how we can plan some things that might lighten her load a bit, maybe change up our teaching strategy, which is something that our teachers have to plan for their lesson plans a week ahead of it. So it just gives them time. I think that's important. And it's, yeah, that's what I wanted to say. And also
go ahead.
another point, just teacher autonomy. And working together is so important. You know, having your documents and just communicating at the very beginning of the year. Perfect time to get started with that is at our face-to-face conference that we have in July every year. Yeah, pair up as much as you can.
Yeah, that's great. And I wanna mention something that Keisha and I talk about often because we work very closely together, like on a regular basis, is that having those teachers identify their strengths and their weaknesses and kind of playing to those. Like Keisha and I work together on a regular basis, and it's not in a co-taught setting, it's in a coaching setting, but we identify what each other is good at and we play to those strengths. And when our teachers can do that too. And I think that that's something that anybody in any profession can relate to. Like if someone's listening to this and you work as a part of a team anywhere, finding the strengths within that team and playing to those is to your benefit. And when we have teachers identifying what they're good at and playing to those, we see a lot of growth in their live teaching because they know one person is carrying a load that's not meant for them. They're both carrying their individual appropriate loads to what needs to keep the classroom running.
That's a great point. So y'all mentioned communication a little bit. what do you think are some systems that help you stay in sync when you're teaching virtually, especially virtually, trying to communicate? Would y'all
Yeah.
say?
I'll take that one because we love a good document to guide people. We have so many guiding documents. Something to go off of what Keisha said about that communication at the beginning. We have a kind of like team building document for new pairs, which honestly I would encourage all of our, veteran pairs to do as well, where it really does. It has them list out not just their strengths and weaknesses, but their pet peeves, their preferences. We as teachers, especially if you're used to being the solo one in the classroom, you're kind of like queen or king of the castle, and you like things running exactly how you like them running. So being able to have everything written down, getting on the same page, understanding each other's point of view, and then you can kind of divide up those responsibilities a little better. We also offer planning documents to help guide teachers because we want them to be meeting at least weekly to discuss the next week, looking at those lesson plans, looking at upcoming assignments, making sure that accommodations are being taken care of. Give them something so that they can write it all down and then reference it. Because if they are like me, I'm going to forget what I said I did yesterday. So I need something to go back and be like, yeah, that was my task. Yes. And the good thing about being virtual is you can also just grab each other real quick in between class. Like, okay, all the kids left, turn off that recording. Okay, we spent way too long on slide 3. We really need to pick it up for this next period. You can have that quick debrief to continue improving as a team even throughout the day.
Love that. That makes a lot of sense. So this could be like self-explanatory, right? But what are the differences when co-teaching is strong in student achievement, student engagement, student behavior? Like when it's strong, what do we see when
Yeah,
it's not so great?
yeah, I can speak to this because I have to share a success story from last year. So when we have a virtual setting, sometimes co-taught pairs get moved around based on where teachers are, and there happens to be new co-taught pairs sometimes where teachers who have never been paired together might work together, may just be a new hire or moving around or whatever it may be. And so we had a pair last year, and I know that they would totally support everything that I had to say because they have led a professional development on this topic in particular. But Marissa Riddle and Gerald Cummings are co-taught teachers in geometry in the secondary grade band. And at the beginning of the year, they kind of hit that point of like, ooh, maybe we do things a little differently from each other. And maybe it doesn't jive super well right off the bat. But they really took the time to build that relationship and trust between the two of them. And when Parker was talking earlier about supporting documents, they took to those and took the ones that worked and dumped the ones that didn't and created their own way of communicating that worked for them. And when they did, like I get goosebumps talking about it because as they grew as a co-taught pair, their student data grew too. Like right along with it. Like as you watch their relationship grow and their style of teaching kind of develop and then make those little adjustments in between lessons of that didn't work, this did, their student scores also grew with that. And that is one of like the coolest things. And that's the purpose of co-teaching, right? Is like playing once they figured out how to use their strengths and work together, it was increasing student achievement. Obviously, we're pulling up test scores and like, oh, it's up again. Oh, it's up again. And just continue to grow. And what's exciting is that co-taught pair got to stay together this year. And so we're just bringing that momentum. And as those pairs work longer and longer together, we just move that momentum into a new group of students and start all over again. So it's this really cool thing of when it clicks and we get it and we work through all of those things that might be a little uncomfy for us when, our styles don't match up right off the bat. When we work through those things, it really does make a difference in student achievement and scores.
Man, that's a great point because it makes me think of in the beginning of the year why don't we just line up all the teachers together and they pick teams and they're like, nah, I like you, no, I like it. But because so you just brought up like a challenge. So a segue, like obviously that would be a tough part, right? If you are
Yeah.
paired with someone that you might not jive well with, or you just like have these big gaps, learning differences. But how have you seen or experienced personally what have been like some challenges with co-teaching that y'all have been able to work through? You've seen people work through. You just kind of hit that with they had challenge and then they grew through it and then we saw achievement. If that fits that, or do we have another story as well, or something that y'all have seen other
Oh,
challenges from co-teaching?
here I come again with a story. But let me just say, first of all, I am the instructional coach for English language arts and social studies. Jess is over math and science. But Marissa and Gerald are my favorite team. Just, I
Can't have
love
them.
the
I'm
way
keeping them. You can't have them. You can't steal them. They're
I'm
mine.
putting in my bid.
The
I'm
highest
putting in
bidder.
my bid, but I don't think they're going anywhere. But I can actually speak to a personal challenge I faced as a new teacher here, right? I was already in my head about how I would transition all the things that worked so well for me in the brick and mortar environment to the virtual environment. And I started as a middle grade band's social studies co-teacher. And 4 days into the start of school, my co-teacher had to exit because her own special needs son, had some struggles, some things going on. So completely understood, but it was like trial by fire.
Yeah.
And the challenge there was that it was almost, because we had to keep that class staffed, it was kind of different people. Sometimes it would be a week, sometimes 2 weeks. And so it was challenging. But what it helped me do was learn how to do all the things that I might not have learned to do as quickly, right? And it also forced an environment in the classroom where the students didn't know who the special education teacher was and who the gen ed teacher was. What they knew of me was that I was the consistent person that set the norms for everyone to follow every day, brought the fun to the classroom, all the things, no matter who else. And then when we finally got a permanent co-teacher, we meshed so well together that she just fell right into the plan, and it was still as equally balanced. And it just went from a challenge to a success story. So it started off challenging, but I count it as success because we did, our students did extremely well that school year. So yeah, it was challenging, but one we overcame.
Yeah, that's awesome. Trial by fire over here. Sink or swim. Well, it sounds like you swam.
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure.
So what would you guys say moving to this? What would y'all say makes GCA's approach to co-teaching especially effective in the virtual setting? Like what does GCA do well with the co-teaching model, particularly being virtual? What would y'all say?
Yeah, I can take this one. So one thing that is obvious to everyone listening is that we're not sitting in a room where we can sit next to a student and peek over their shoulder and say, okay, show me what you're working on, and I'll just work with them directly, right? And so the power of our virtual setting is using the tools that we do have. We do have so many programs and platforms that give us some of that insight. But also, one thing that our co-teachers are doing so well is bringing in that special education perspective, that general education perspective, and really putting those two things together to dig into what data do we need on our students to teach them in a better way. And they're not just doing that in let's put our kids in another standardized test because they don't have enough of those. It's more creative than that. They are throwing together artificial intelligence bots that are communicating with students, and they're working back and forth to kind of group their students and their level of understanding. They're asking students to provide emojis for quick checks for understanding in class. They are even doing even more creative things like asking their students to create a TikTok-like video over a vocabulary word. And so relating to student interest, using the technology that we have, all coming back around to covering the content that the kids need to know to move forward in their education, which is something that we are so strong in. It seems silly to say our GCA teachers are strong in technology, but that's our tool, right? And they are using and learning creative ways to use that technology to break through that computer screen barrier. We say this all the time. We teach kids. We don't teach computers. And that kind of stays in the forefront of when we're helping guide some of our co-teachers of we're pushing through that. How can you make that connection to that student, not to their computer? And what does that really look like? And that looks like using what we have and putting both of those minds together to be creative about it.
Sure. Would y'all add or say, if someone's listening who's brick and mortar teacher, what are some things that you just said, Jess, that y'all could say could be implemented, or any of the things we've already talked about could be implemented in a brick and mortar school? Are we just talking about things that are just specific to being a virtual teacher, or are there things that we can highlight that brick and mortar teachers could take or use in the brick and mortar classroom? Could anyone speak to that?
I think
Yeah,
I can for sure speak to that.
I was going to say, get Keisha in on this one.
Yeah, because I think amongst the three of us, first of all, I know I'm the oldest, but I think I've had the longest span of time in brick and mortar in different roles, right? I started this on the other side of things as a general education teacher who had a co-teacher in the classroom. But that is something that transfers, the relationship that you build with that co-teacher, communicating with each other, finding ways to support your students. Even in the brick and mortar environment, I had the same rule. No one should know, from administrators to students to anyone else who's observing this classroom, who the general education teacher and special education teacher, just as no one should know who the students with disabilities are. And I spent most of my career, the first school I taught, where I was a general education teacher with a co-teacher, our special education population was 42% of the school. And so those types of things have led me to work my way into focusing specifically on, the special education side of things. And that is something that does transfer the most, is just that assuming that you are both coming to this with positive intent and communicating with each other. Those are things that teachers in the brick and mortar environment understand. We saw over and over again how the pairs that planned together intentionally did so much better. Their students performed so much better than those that had conflict with each other, that they didn't clear up, or that, just didn't plan, just didn't think it was important to spend any time other than when they were in the classroom together planning. And that certainly transfers. I would say another thing that transfers very well from brick and mortar to the virtual environment is understanding it's not a competition. And I'm going to speak to Jess and I on this one. For sure, because we are very different in all the ways, but we work. And Parker, y'all better leave us alone. They try to split us up sometimes, Halton, and make us work with other people.
Stop it, Parker.
But that's something that transfers from the brick and mortar as well. When you can identify the strengths of your partner, even in the virtual environment, and also those areas of need, right? And lift each other up. It helps you work together and get things done, for the benefit of who we are all here to serve. And that's our student population. So yeah, shout out to you, Jess.
Listen, the best team. So happy I work with her, because we do identify, and I think that's something to say too. It's like being transparent enough to be like, hey, I'm not so good at this thing, but it looks like you are so good at this thing. Like, can you help me with it? That transparency also not only builds the relationship, but also lets you play to those strengths. And to your point too, Halton, about like what they can take to brick and mortar, that creativity we're kind of forced into in the virtual setting of like, we're not there next to them. I can imagine what you could do with AI in a classroom with students. Like, I think sometimes those different ways of approaching gathering student data can be scary because they don't have to do those things in brick and mortar. They can still, do a test or a raise hand or whatever it is, but trying them anyway and kind of not hiding from those new things that are coming out like AI, like playing to the idea that a student could make a TikTok video about a vocabulary, not actually on TikTok, but a type video. But playing to those things and getting a little creative in the way that we're providing instruction, even if you were in brick and mortar versus virtual.
That's great. So what advice would y'all give to other schools, either online school, brick and mortar school? I think we could keep it general, but what advice would you give to these schools to implement co-teaching well? If they're like, hey, we want to try and do this well, what would you say get this right? It sounded like, Keisha, you already really hit on make sure you get this right, that the students don't know who the gen ed teacher is and who the special ed teacher is. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounded like that's kind of your big thing. So
Yes.
what is there something, Parker or Jess, you would add is here's the advice I would give if you want to implement good co-teaching. Try and give me one thing that another school could take. Like, all right, let's nail this.
Yeah. My thing would be to don't be afraid to fail. Like honestly. So we've had a little bit of a battle last year. Changing to class and trying breakout rooms, and sometimes they crash. Sometimes it crashes and burns and everyone goes back, but that doesn't mean you can't keep trying. So yeah, try the new thing together. Look at it together. See, oh man, this could really help our kids look at this in a different way. Don't be afraid to try something new in there. You have so much technology at your fingertips, and it can be really overwhelming. But you have that pair, so you don't have to do all of the learning yourself. You can say, ooh, hey, Jess, you've mentioned AI like 3 times. Guess who is going to figure out the AI thing for my
No.
class this week? And I love a spreadsheet. So me over here, I'm going to use our data from that test last week, and I'm going to make some targeted groups based on the standards to make sure that we're hitting these kids where they need.
Love it. What do you think, Jess? What advice would you give if there was a piece of advice that you could give to another school to take and implement good co-teaching?
Yeah, for me, it would be identifying that all of the students are your shared kids and not getting caught up in there are certain students in here that have disabilities and those that do not. Strong teaching is just identifying kids that need help regardless of a label or a description or and supporting those students. And in a co-taught classroom, us as teachers, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, we like our sandbox. That's our classroom. We're the king of the classroom, right? And so it's hard in co-teaching to step away from that, but it's also so necessary to look at this as our class, our students. And when you put that in the forefront of all the decisions you make as a co-taught pair, everything else naturally follows if you're both centered around how do we serve our students in our classroom. It changes the way every planning conversation goes. It changes the way we instruct. It changes the way that we look at data and how we pivot when things don't go as planned if we're always back to that student center.
And I do want to add one other thing that there is no amount of communication that's too much. None. Like we have teachers who, in addition to the required meetings, have scheduled other meetings, as things come up and like I think it was just said earlier, you can always reach out, just to chat away. There is no amount of communication that is too much when it comes to to collaborating with your co-teacher. So just wanted to add that in there too.
I love that constant communication. So y'all are all in leadership now, leadership positions. So how do y'all specifically support co-teaching and co-teachers to help them be effective? Like what are the specific things that you think that GCA does well from a leadership standpoint of supporting co-teachers?
Oh, that's a great one. One of the things from the start of it is having the ability to build relationships with teachers, whether they're veterans or new teachers to this environment. They understand that we've done it too, right? And so when we come to them with strategies that we know have worked in our classrooms, they buy into it more. So, that's the first thing I would say, right, y'all? I'm sure you all have other ideas, but that's the number one for me, just being able to build those relationships and that trust, so that they know we're here to support them, not evaluate and criticize, or, we have no punitive responsibility. So it's just another partnership that's formed, another team that they have that just works. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to point out something that's very unique in what Keisha's talking about to GCA is I have never been in another school where teachers are supported from a compliance side in special education and also supported by someone specific to special education on the instructional side. Yes. You get the general education side for instruction, support, and curriculum there very often. But what you don't find is someone who gets that special education background when it applies to instruction. And so what we have at GCA is this by support where you've got gen ed counterparts who are able to support those co-taught pairs from that perspective. And then you have your special education coach who's coming in and bringing in the special education side. So both of the teachers in that co-taught pair feel like they have somebody to support them who understands their perspective. And I think that element alone gives us a head start from other schools where, a SPED teacher might have to stop and kind of explain to that general education instructional coach their perspective, whereas we kind of come in with a lot of the background knowledge that they have as well and can help kind of mediate those conversations. But that's definitely unique to GCA. I have not had that anywhere else.
Yeah, just to throw on top of that, my own personal experience in brick and mortar, I was trying to remember, I think we had one coach for the whole building, and getting a hold of her was a task in and of itself. So that is the good and bad of Zoom, is someone can always reach you. But it makes us way more available to teachers. Like, hey, they are in class and something broke and they're like, 911, I need something for next period. Like, help me out. And to help them plan more long term. We will look at the data with you. We will make sure that you are targeting the correct standards, hitting those big priority ones so that your kids can really show some serious growth. They can help you guys go and, modify or, adapt your lessons to make sure that, you're reaching those kids. So
we go in and teach the lessons.
We'll
go in and model as well.
Yeah.
We will even model co-teaching. I've even pulled Parker in with me before where we had a co-taught pair that was having trouble talking to each other in those planning meetings and kind of getting on task. And so we went in and modeled what we kind of thought it should look like. And so they were able to take that and start saying, okay, well, that's what it should look like. How can we get there? And so that's the power of having not just a special education coach, but multiple, where we can kind of tag team things even when we need to and model that for our co-teachers.
And that's incredible. And I think it's easy to see too, just from this conversation, all of y'all being in leadership, that who your teachers are. Like you've been able to name them, you support them. So it's clear to see that from a leadership standpoint, it's not just here we go again. It's like you enjoy what you do, you love supporting them, you want them to do their best, and it's clear to see that you're passionate about it and that you all like each other too. It's clear to see from y'all being able to work together, that working closely from a leadership standpoint. But here's what we hope listeners will walk away with: that co-teaching, it's more than just sharing a screen, right? It's about sharing a mission, And when it works better together. Y'all mentioned your students, our students, y'all mentioning that. That's such a great idea to walk away with. So Jess, Keisha, Parker, thank you all for sharing your insight and experience. And to our listeners, if today's episode gave you ideas or inspiration, be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more Voices of Virtual Education.